qualified as a civil engineer and was involved in construction branch, operation branch and maintenance, particularly water initially. Later on, I went to the head works branch, as it was then called, not far from here at Guildford. That was the whole new world in a way, because headworks was small in number but huge in area, and I was in charge of the southern dams of the original Upper Nepean scheme. The thing that got me involved very much in history was Cataract Dam. As the engineer for Cataract Dam, the valves down there were making a hell of a lot of noise and shaking at certain flow rates. That I tried to get all the records and couldn't get much because it was basically close to the last century. So I hit upon the Royal Commissions, which were examining other things, mainly financial, might have records of what valves went in. It turned out that they didn't much, but in reading all the documentation that went with it, and basically 3 Royal Commissions and a follow-up commission which ran in parallel to one of the intermediate ones, I realised this was a whole wealth of information there. A thing that people don't realise is that the Upper Nepean scheme was built with no dams at all, because Prospect is technically a reservoir, and that was done by damming up the very upstream part of Prospect Creek, which doesn't have a catchment nearby. It was called the so-called run-of-the-river scheme, whereby the 4 rivers, where they come together, and through the Nepean Tunnel, you get the 4 rivers effectively coming together in the Upper Canal. And that worked very nicely for 10 years, but when the extreme drought of 1895, 1902 occurred, the canal stopped flowing and there was no way they could get it going. So the scheme they came up with was to build an emergency weir at Menangle, very close to, virtually under the railway bridge there, and then another one down at Penrith. And they actually put an electric pumping station in there to pump from Menangle up to the Upper Canal. There's a point where the canal goes very close to the Nepean River, and that's where they were going to pump up. But using electricity in those days, so they must have brought coal to Menangle, created the electricity there, electric wires ran down to the pump, and we've got photographs of the water just coming out of that pipe. But it had an unexpected effect that as soon as that was working, it started to rain, and which is often the problem with large water things. But you dare not stop doing it because you won't meet the deadline. But by chance, it turns out that it wasn't necessary. And in some ways, this is what people say about the desalination plant, whereas initially I was a little bit wary of it. I thought that people should be able to use less and that, but once I realised that how difficult it is to build storages of fresh, and also that the power would be generated by wind power, it sort of changed my point of view. But it had another effect that I only worked out later, in that after the desalination plant was running, you had the effect of water coming from the west, a la the Upper Nepean scheme, but water coming from the east, a la the desal plant. But what made me really think was, I was told that at night, water from the constant rate from the desal goes up as far west as Auburn. And so you realise that you've got a system which is fed from both ends, which is really fantastic, because it means that in future years, perhaps 50 years from now, we would have been calling for the pipes from the Upper Nepean and Warragamba to be upsized, where we've now got a perfect example where it's coming from each end. And I told that to one of the senior engineers, and he said, "Oh, God, I wish you'd thought that out and told me beforehand," because he must have been criticised very strongly for building the plant.